I grew up in my grandmother's apartment. It was a nice place, not so old. At least, not as old as her. I loved her all my life. My mother abandoned me when I was quite small, so she was really all I knew. My grandfather? I've never met. From what some told me, he had been taken by it, one of the first victims apparently. See, it had been around for over 60 years, and still no one understood how it chose its victims. I believe there had to be some sort of logic to it, but I didn't get it. There have been way too many deaths lately, and that scared me. So I moved out of the city. My grandma was still at her peak, and she was completely capable of taking care of herself. In the small town I moved to, they did not even know about it. Admittedly, that had been difficult to get used to. It felt as if I was erasing parts of my life. My grandfather, the friends I lost. However, people outside the city did believe that it was cursed. Apparently, anyone who moved there never returned. They rarely knew what happened to them, but they did believe it was not all a coincidence, and yet, it just did not exist to them. They said it was the city's weird power. It just destroyed you. That was why no one ever went there. 6 years passed. My grandmother called me every single day, often with bad news. You remember Miss Ruth, your elementary school teacher? She was found dead in the elevator. Mr. Banks, too. And your mother. I told her not to tell me about what happened to my mother. Not because I loved her, because I highly doubted I did, but because I just wanted to forget that she even existed. Luckily for me, my grandmother understood it and switched topics. But there were so many people dying, it was insane. I knew it had been like that before, but even though it scared me, it was somewhat normal. So to see it from outside, where no one died for no reason, it was just absurd. But what was even stranger was the way people seemed to avoid talking about those few that dared to go to the city. Apparently, they were accused of wanting too much. The town was humble. Really small, barely any bars and restaurants, but it was easy enough to land a job. People decided to stay because they knew leaving would be fatal, and I understood them. I ended up finding the love of my life, and we even started our little family. I felt bad that my grandmother could never see my children, just talk to them on the phone. But I knew that was for the best. She refused to leave, told me many times if she died from it, she would maybe see my grandfather again. Did I agree? No. See, everything was fine for a while. My daughter was 2, cute, toddling Wander. She talked to her Nana every week and loved her to bits. But one day, my grandmother stopped answering the phone. Now that was unusual, and it filled my heart with worry. I knew she was getting old. Even though she had my mother as a teenager, who had me as a teenager, time has still passed. She was strong even in the days leading up to her disappearance, but I just had a bad feeling. In my town, it was difficult to get any news from the city. My only source had been my grandmother, and I had to pay close attention to how I spoke even to her. I could only ever call her when no one else was listening. Even my daughter would never find out why I'd moved so far away. It was a bit of a taboo subject from what I understood. Maybe because of the curse they believed in? Even after years, I was confused but lived by the rules. For me and my family. But my grandmother never picked up the phone. Days passed and nothing. It was starting to worry me greatly. This had never happened before. She knew I missed and loved her, and she would never just ignore my calls. I never called anyone else either. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had no numbers. Would have been too suspicious, so I had 2 choices. Something deep inside was telling me that my grandmother was already gone. Even if I wanted to save her, it would be futile, and I needed to stay with my family. I kept thinking about it, how much they would miss and love me if I were to disappear like that as well. But I never had the chance to say goodbye, and that broke my heart. I wanted to go back home and just see her one more time. Even if she was gone, I felt like I needed this. I needed closure. The knowledge that even in death she knew I cared for her. And what if she was alive, but trapped, or just very sick? She lived in a pretty fancy neighborhood, so what if she ended up being taken to the hospital? Had a heart attack or stroke, or... It took me days to decide. Even if I knew that meant time was running out, would I be able to come back? I lived outside of the city, right? I wasn't going there to work or something, just to check my old Grammy I loved so much. A little like Little Red Riding Hood, save for the hood and cookies and Wolf, hopefully. I wanted so bad just to make sure that she was fine. My wife disagreed with me. I think you should stay. Going to the city is suicide. Her tone was hushed, eyes always wandering off in search of our toddler who was in the phase of hating to sleep during the afternoon. She was adorable most of the time, but we tried to be strict with her, knowing that it was better for her. I managed to come here, right? Maybe that means, I can actually sneak in, get my grandma and sneak back out. No one goes there because they know they won't come back. And you know that, she said. Can you imagine leaving your child? And me? What would we do without you? I love you both, you know that. But I also love my grandmother. She raised and loved me. I should have never left her there. Love? Please. I don't think you can save her now, so why risk it? I understood my wife, and that is why I lied to her. I agree. I'm sorry. I just got so worried about her. Maybe she's even fine, Maybe she just lost the phone or something. That was highly impossible, but I refused to say it out loud. I needed her to believe me. Yeah, I think that's what happened. Can you just, call her in a few days and see what happens? Don't worry so much, okay? I kissed her without even responding. I hated hiding things from her, but I've made my decision. I had to go to the city, but I was going to come back. I was sure about that. My love for my family would be enough to guide me. I was so sure of myself that I left without even leaving a letter, just kissing the two loves of my life on the forehead. As it was so late into the night, they didn't even notice. I'm sorry, but hopefully I'll be back before you know it, I whispered. Despite how it felt sometimes, the city was not even that far away. Just 2 hours of driving, and that was it. I was back to where I was born, the place where I grew up and went to school. I knew that there were many people that I once treasured who died there, but I refused to think about that. I always wondered, however, how come not many people moved away from the city? But from what I've heard, it was not as easy. I had been just very, very lucky. I still knew where I had to drive, even though it had been years. I was there so fast, but I waited until morning in the car. I decided so, mostly because if my grandmother was okay, then disturbing her would have been awful, really. I didn't want to do that, and so I slept for a while. When morning came, my wife called me, but I did not pick up. I couldn't. Not until I knew what was going on. In a way, I felt a little resentment towards her for not even giving me the choice to really think about what I wanted to do. With being so against my decision, she forced me into it. Or so I felt like. But I still loved her and I wanted to go back to her. And so I decided to hurry up. I finally made my way to my grandmother's apartment. Come on, you can do this. She has to be okay. I knocked once, and then twice. I knocked one more time, but no answer. Damn. Grandma? Hey, it's me, I shouted. I was hitting the door by then, my hands slamming against the wood painfully, but nothing. Hey, open up. Without even thinking, I looked through the peephole. Normally, my grandmother blocked it up, telling me how she hated how people could peek into her house. I didn't want to tell her that they could barely see anything, just like how she couldn't really see who it really was either, but... However, I was wrong, because I could actually see pretty clearly. I wished I couldn't, because my grandmother was there, sitting in her old little rocking chair. The front door opened up to the living room, something I hated as a child. She was rocking back and forth, but she was clearly dead. You can't live long if your brains had been blown out, right? I admit that at first, it was disgust that hit me. Nausea, strong enough to shake me. I had to look away for a moment. I could not keep my eyes on her. No. And then, that was when the panic struck. The door was open. I did not expect that. I really didn't. Especially because it was clear that my grandmother had been there for a while, rotting away, all on her own. I'm so sorry. Falling on my knees, I begged for her forgiveness, even if I knew that she couldn't hear me anymore. I knew that if I begged her to come with me, she would have. But I never did. I asked her, of course, but it had been easy just to ignore me, I bet. Just like how I ignored my wife. And she had been right. I ran up the stairs searching for someone, anyone that could help. I knew that there was no way to save my grandmother, but I needed another human being at that moment. Everything was the same, exactly as it had been when I grew up. The old lady who opened the door was the same too. She used to babysit me. "Oh, I can't believe it. Have you really come back?" She grinned at me. I nodded. I felt powerless. I needed to tell her what was going on, but speaking about it would have made it more real. "My grandmother," I choked out finally. "Oh, yes. I know it's been rough on you. I was quite surprised that you never went to the funeral." "Wait, what?" What do you mean? My grandmother's funeral? The one who had been murdered, clearly? And very recently, too? How could she even know? The funeral, 6 months ago, right? Or did they never contact you? Wait, did you even know that she's... I was frozen. The story was not adding up. I talked to my grandmother not so long before she stopped replying to my calls. But there this lady was, telling me that she had been dead for way longer than that. No, you're not getting it. Please come with me." And she did, following me, but cautious as she was dealing with an injured animal. Her confusion seemed to match mine. But when we arrived, my grandmother was gone from there. Doors still open, but there was no one in the rocking chair. No blood, no nothing. I admit, I was surprised when I found out about that little girl. The one who killed her? She was famous on the internet, whatever that means. "Oh," I managed out. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And that was when I realized. We hadn't been speaking to my grandmother. We'd been speaking to it. And it was after me. I was back in my car in record time, driving faster than ever. I didn't even say goodbye. I couldn't. Not when my life was on the line. Now that I understood what was going on, my instincts were kicking in, telling me that I needed to run. Once, I have succeeded, which meant that maybe it was possible to do it again. Most people could not leave town, but I did that once. That meant I was special, right? I called my wife in the car, hands shaking, but my mind focused on the tasks at hand. I needed to get away, and I needed to do it fast. "Where the hell are you? Please tell me you didn't go back." "Grandma's gone. She's been gone for 6 months. It wants me. I'm coming home," is all I managed to say before hanging up. I could not let anything distract me. I had to survive. I ran out of fuel on the outskirts of the city, still too close for comfort. I knew that I had a full tank before, and yet... "You think you're so smart, right?" I muttered. There was no one there, and yet I felt like I was being watched. Despite my fears, my stop at the gas station passed by with no issue. I was back on the road in moments, but my car stopped, just there in the middle of the highway. There wasn't much traffic, there never was, but suddenly, it felt as if there were cars everywhere. "It's all in your head," I muttered to myself. "It has to be." And so I stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath as I dragged myself to the back. I had to push it to the side of the road. It was too heavy for me to do it on my own. I knew it. Impossible. But I tried. And even when I heard the honking coming from too close for comfort, I was frozen, seeing the minivan speeding towards me. I could see the horror on the driver's life. Clearly, he wanted to stop. But he couldn't. I just hoped that at least one of us would survive the impact. It hurt, like fire spreading through my body. And then I was gone. Just like that.